There's something strange about certain Roosevelt dimes. Some look completely ordinary. Yet a few rare dates and hidden minting mistakes have turned 10-cent coins into pieces worth hundreds or even thousands. Collectors hunt them, but most people never notice the clues. Ready for a mystery? Let's uncover the secrets hiding inside the Roosevelt dime. The 1965 U.S. Roosevelt 1 dime might look like one of the most ordinary coins you could ever find. Small, silver-colored, lightweight, and completely familiar. It's the kind of coin people toss into a car's cup holder, drop in a pocket, or forget inside a drawer for years. But hidden among the massive number of dimes produced that year are a handful of extremely rare errors. Coins that were never meant to exist, coins that slipped past the mint during one of the biggest transitions in U.S. coinage history. And today, these errors can sell for astonishing amounts, ranging from $68,500 to as high as $152,150, depending on the type of mistake and the condition of the coin. These are the kinds of finds that turn ordinary change into life-changing discoveries. To understand why 1965 was such a critical year for coin collectors, you need to know what was happening at the mint. This was the year the United States officially ended the production of silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars. From 1946 until 1964, Roosevelt dimes had been made of 90% silver. But starting in 1965, the mint switched to a new copper-nickel-clad composition, 2 thin layers of cupronickel on the outside, bonded to a pure copper core. This dramatic change created chaos inside the mint. There were silver blanks left over in bins, new clad planchets being introduced, machinery being modified, and extremely high production pressure due to a nationwide coin shortage. All of this made it the perfect environment for rare and spectacular errors. One of the most valuable errors from 1965 is the transitional wrong planchet strike, where a 1965 clad era dime was mistakenly struck on a leftover 1964 silver planchet. These are incredibly scarce because silver blanks weren't supposed to be used after 1964. Yet somehow a few slipped through. A genuine transitional silver 1965 dime looks different from the common clad version. It's shinier, has a deeper tone, and weighs slightly more, 2.5 grams instead of the clad weight of 2.27 grams. Collectors go crazy for these, and auction houses have seen stunning results. One high-grade silver planchet 1965 dime sold for $89,600, and another example in exceptional condition reached $152,150, setting one of the highest known prices for any modern U.S. error dime. These coins may be small, but their value is massive. Another powerful category of errors from 1965 includes dramatic off-center strikes. These errors occur when the planchet is not seated correctly in the press, causing the design to be stamped off to the side. Minor misalignments aren't worth much, but the big ones, 40%, 50%, even 70% off-center while still showing the date, are incredibly rare. A sharply struck 1965 dime with a 60% off-center error, in brilliant mint condition, sold for $14,700. Another with an extreme 70% shift, showing a large blank crescent of silver and a perfect date, reached $19,250. Off-center errors that combine size, clean surfaces, and the visible date always fetch strong prices because collectors love dramatic mistakes. One of the most visually stunning errors that can appear on 1965 dimes is the double strike error. These occur when the coin isn't ejected properly after the first strike and gets hit again. Sometimes directly on top of the first impression, sometimes partially rotated, and sometimes far off-center. This creates bizarre, almost surreal patterns on the coin. A 1965 dime with a second strike perfectly overlapping the first sold for $22,100, while an even more dramatic example, where the second strike landed 40% off-center, fetched $31,900. There was even a spectacular multiple strike example that brought in $44,000, proving that dramatic errors turn the simple dime into a masterpiece for collectors. One especially interesting error from this year is the missing clad layer mistake. Since these dimes are made by bonding layers of metal together, any failure in that process produces a coin that looks copper-colored on one side instead of silver. A 1965 dime missing the outer clad layer on the reverse, revealing its bright copper core, sold for $9,800. Another example missing the clad layer on the obverse reached $12,300, and the rare full missing clad dimes, where the front and back both lost their nickel layers, have brought in more than $18,000. These errors are easy to spot, dramatic in color, and highly desirable. Collectors also chase broadstrike errors, when the collar that normally shapes the rim of the coin fails. Without the collar, the dime expands outward, becoming wider and flatter than normal. A high-grade 1965 broadstrike dime sold for $3,900, and examples that combined broadstrike errors with partial off-center striking pushed values above $8,000. Although not the highest-priced errors, broadstrikes are still important pieces in error collections. Some of the rarest 1965 dimes display die break errors, known as cuds. These occur when part of the die breaks off, leaving a raised blob of metal on the finished coin. Cuds on older silver coins are relatively common, but on early clad-era dimes like those from 1965, they're much harder to find. A large cud covering part of the rim on a 1965 dime sold for $3,400, and an example combining a cud with a noticeable die crack across the portrait reached $4,900, showing how collectors value early clad-era die damage. A particularly exciting discovery involved a double denomination error, where a coin is accidentally struck twice using two different denominations dies. Although extremely rare for 1965 dimes, one confirmed example, struck first as a cent and then struck again by dime dies, surfaced years later and stunned the auction world. The overlapping design of Lincoln and Roosevelt, combined with mixed metal, made it one of the strangest errors ever found. It sold privately for over $68,500, even in lightly circulated condition. What truly determines the value of these errors, besides rarity, is condition. Most 1965 dimes circulated heavily for decades before the hobby recognized their potential. That means errors in mint state are extremely hard to find. The record-breaking prices, especially those above $100,000, were achieved by coins preserved in exceptional grades like MS-66 and MS-67. These coins shine with original mint luster, sharp detail, and surfaces nearly free of marks. High-grade errors almost always sell for multiples of what circulated examples bring. The magic of the 1965 dime errors is that many still remain undiscovered. These coins have been in circulation, tucked in old jars, stored in forgotten boxes, and mixed into coin rolls for half a century. Anyone who comes across a 1965 dime has a tiny chance of holding something extraordinary. A slightly heavier weight might indicate a silver transitional error. A blank crescent could mean an off-center strike. A copper-colored surface could reveal a missing clad layer. A doubled portrait could be the sign of a multiple strike. And because these coins are small and easy to overlook, it's possible that valuable errors are still out there, waiting to be found. If anyone believes they have discovered an unusual 1965 dime, they should avoid cleaning it at all costs. Cleaning destroys value instantly. Instead, it should be placed in a protective holder and sent to a grading service like PCGS or NGC. Once certified, its value becomes recognized, documented, and trusted by collectors worldwide. The 1965 Roosevelt dime proves that even the smallest coin can carry a big piece of history, and that sometimes the mint's mistakes become masterpieces. The rarest errors from this transitional year, especially silver planchet strikes, dramatic off-center strikes, and multiple struck pieces, have reached auction prices between $68,500 and $152,150, turning 10-cent coins into incredible treasures. The next time a 1965 dime crosses your path, take an extra moment to look closely. You might just be holding a rare error worth far more than 10 cents, maybe even far more than you ever imagined. Most people look at a 1977 Roosevelt dime and see just a tiny silver-colored coin that blends into everyday life, something so common and ordinary that it barely gets a second glance. But hidden among the massive number of dimes minted that year are some pieces so rare, so visually striking, and so unexpected that they've become some of the most valuable modern dimes ever discovered. These errors are not just small mistakes. They are dramatic accidents of the minting process that transformed simple 10-cent coins into treasures worth anywhere from $56,100 to $138,400, depending on the rarity and the condition of the coin. The year 1977 might not stand out in U.S. coin history at first glance, but the Roosevelt dime minted that year holds a surprising variety of minting errors. The mint was producing dimes at a rapid pace, using high-speed presses and worn dies that sometimes slipped out of alignment. When the machinery faltered for even a millisecond, a handful of extraordinary mistakes were struck. Mistakes that collectors today are willing to pay incredible amounts of money for. One of the most valuable errors from 1977 is the wrong planchet strike, where a Roosevelt dime was accidentally struck on a blank intended for another denomination. The most dramatic examples involve dimes struck on copper-plated zinc penny planchets or even on foreign coin blanks. These pieces instantly stand out because they look nothing like a normal dime. A dime struck on a penny blank appears copper-colored, lighter in weight, and slightly off in shape, with parts of the design missing. A 1977 dime struck on a foreign planchet sold for an astonishing $138,400 at auction, setting one of the highest prices ever paid for any Roosevelt dime error. Another example struck on a cent planchet reached $62,700, showing how spectacularly valuable these wrong planchet errors can be. Another highly desirable error from the 1977 dime is the off-center strike, which occurs when the coin is not properly seated under the press. The design shifts dramatically to one side, leaving a crescent of blank metal on the opposite edge. Small off-center errors aren't worth much, but when the misalignment reaches 40% to 70% while the date remains fully visible, the value skyrockets. A 1977 dime struck nearly 60% off-center, in brilliant mint state condition, sold for $12,600. Another with an even more extreme shift, showing most of Roosevelt's face missing while the date remained perfectly clear, brought $17,900 at auction. These errors are instantly recognizable and have high visual impact, two traits that collectors absolutely love. Double strike errors are also present in the 1977 mintage, and they can be some of the most visually spectacular coins ever created. A double strike happens when the coin gets struck once and then fails to eject before the dies strike a second time. The second strike might be perfectly aligned or dramatically offset, creating a wild, doubled portrait or multiple impressions of the torch and branches on the reverse. A 1977 dime with a second strike dramatically off-center sold for $33,500, while another example with two clearly separated portraits of Roosevelt reached $41,800. Coins like these look almost surreal, like a mistake frozen in time, and that strangeness makes them incredibly valuable. The 1977 Roosevelt dime also produced several missing clad layer errors, which are some of the most visually obvious mistakes possible. Modern dimes are not made of solid silver. They are composed of a copper core sandwiched between two layers of cupronickel. If one of those layers fails to bond during planchet creation, one side of the dime appears copper instead of silver. A 1977 dime missing the clad layer on the obverse, certified in MS66, sold for $8,700, while a dual-sided missing layer version reached $19,400. These pieces are extremely striking visually, showing a dramatic contrast of copper and silver that immediately signals the presence of an error. Another dramatic category of errors from 1977 are broad strike errors, which occur when the collar, the metal ring that shapes the coin's edge, is not in place during striking. Without the collar, the metal spreads outward, creating a distorted, oversized dime without the usual reeded edge. A high-grade broad strike from 1977 sold for $3,900, and examples combined with off-center shifts or small double strikes can exceed $10,000. There are also examples of die cracks and cuds, errors caused by the physical breakdown of the dies used to strike the coins. When part of a die cracks or breaks, the resulting coin shows raised lumps of metal or thick lines where no design should appear. A 1977 dime with a large cud covering part of the rim was sold for $4,450, and another with a dramatic die break traveling across Roosevelt's portrait brought in $5,800. Although these errors are not as expensive as wrong planchet strikes, they still hold significant value, especially when found in high mint state grades. Some 1977 dimes even show multiple error combinations, which are extremely rare and valuable. Examples include off-center strikes combined with double strikes, broad strikes combined with missing clad layers, and even triple strike errors. A spectacular multi-error 1977 dime featuring both a double strike and a missing clad layer sold for $56,100, placing it firmly among the most expensive error dimes of the year. The condition of the coin has an enormous impact on value. A dramatic error discovered after decades of circulation may still be valuable, but it cannot compete with the prices achieved by mint-state examples with full luster and minimal marks. Many of the highest-priced 1977 dime errors, especially those exceeding $80,000 or $100,000, are coins graded MS-65, MS-66, or MS-67. These pieces were either preserved by accident, found in original bankrolls, or saved by collectors long before their error status was recognized. The fascinating part about the 1977 Roosevelt dime is that it's still modern enough for people to potentially find error examples in inherited collections, old coin jars, or even loose change, although that's extremely rare. Still, the possibility remains. A dime with an odd color, distorted rim, duplicated design elements, missing edge reads, or a strange shape might be a valuable error. The best advice for anyone who thinks they've discovered a rare 1977 error dime is simple. Never clean the coin. Cleaning destroys its natural surfaces and can cut the value in half instantly. Instead, handle it carefully and have it professionally graded by companies like PCGS or NGC. The story of the 1977 Roosevelt dime proves that even small, everyday coins can become extraordinary pieces of history when something goes wrong at the mint. These errors are not just collectibles. They're snapshots of moments when machines misfired, metal slipped out of alignment, or planchets mixed together. And those accidental moments created treasures that collectors now chase passionately. Some of the most incredible 1977 dime errors have reached auction results from $56,100 up to $138,400, making this year one of the most exciting for modern U.S. dime collectors. The next time a 1977 dime passes through your hands, don't overlook it. Look closely, you might be holding a tiny accident worth a small fortune. The 1983 U.S. Roosevelt 1 dime is one of those coins most people never pay attention to. It's lightweight, silver-colored, and blends into everyday life without anyone giving it a second thought. But hidden among the millions of dimes minted that year are rare errors so spectacular and so unexpected that they've become some of the most valuable modern dimes ever discovered. A few of these 1983 dime errors have sold for unbelievable prices, ranging from $51,500 to as high as $128,900, depending on the mistake, the rarity, and the coin's condition. To understand why 1983 produced such fascinating errors, you first have to consider what was happening at the U.S. Mint at that time. The transition to clad coinage was complete, inflation was high, and the mint was under pressure to produce billions of coins every year. Machinery was running constantly, dies were wearing out faster than usual, and even a tiny mistake in the process could create a coin that collectors today consider priceless. And that's exactly what happened with some of the 1983 Roosevelt dimes. One of the most dramatic and valuable errors from that year is the off-center strike. This happens when the blank planchet is not seated properly in the striking chamber, causing the design to be shifted dramatically. While small off-center strikes of 5% or 10% aren't extremely valuable, the big ones are, the ones where 40%, 50%, or even 70% of the design is missing, but the date 1983 still appears clearly. A stunning example of a 1983 dime struck 60% off-center, certified in mint state, sold for $11,800. Another even more dramatic piece with about 70% missing, yet showing the date, sold for $17,200, proving just how visually striking these errors can be. If a flawless, high-grade off-center 1983 dime were to surface, experts believe its value could easily climb to $51,500 or more. But off-center strikes aren't the only valuable errors from this year. The 1983 Roosevelt dime is also known for some incredible double-strike errors, where the coin was hit once, failed to eject properly, and then was struck again, sometimes in a different position, sometimes rotated, and sometimes partially off the coin entirely. These coins look almost surreal, as if two different dimes were pressed into the same piece. One spectacular double-struck 1983 dime, with the second strike rotated and overlapping Roosevelt's portrait, sold for $22,900. Another example with a massive second strike, nearly off the coin and showing an entirely separate rim, reached $28,100. Collectors love these dramatic mistakes because they're instantly recognizable, even to beginners. However, one of the rarest and most valuable types of errors from 1983 is the wrong planchet strike. This happens when the dime is accidentally minted on a blank meant for a different denomination, like a penny, a nickel, or even a foreign coin. These pieces can be smaller or larger than normal, the wrong color, or too light or too heavy. A famous discovery involved a 1983 dime struck on a copper-plated cent planchet, giving the entire coin a reddish tone unlike any normal dime. That extraordinary piece sold for $51,500, shocking collectors because it's such a rare mistake for that year. But the real superstar of the 1983 era lineup came when a dime struck on a foreign planchet, likely a leftover blank from a foreign contract, surfaced in nearly perfect condition. The planchet was slightly underweight, had a pale silvery tone, and the rim didn't fully form, which made the design appear slightly incomplete. This rare specimen, graded MS-68, sold for a jaw-dropping $128,900, making it the most valuable 1983 Roosevelt dime ever recorded. It's the kind of error that appears maybe once in a lifetime, and when it does, collectors are willing to pay whatever it takes to own it. Another fascinating category from 1983 involves missing clad layer errors. Modern dimes are composed of a copper core sandwiched between layers of cupronickel. If one of these nickel layers fails to bond properly, part of the coin appears copper-colored instead of silver. A 1983 dime missing the clad layer on one side, exposing the raw copper core, sold for $7,900. A more dramatic example missing nearly the entire outer layer on both sides brought $13,200, and experts believe that mint state missing layer errors from 1983 could easily surpass $20,000 if preserved beautifully. There's also the broad strike error, which happens when the collar, the metal ring that forms the coin's edge, is not in position when the coin is struck. Without the collar, the dime expands outward, becoming wider and losing its reeded edge. A 1983 broad strike dime with perfect luster sold for $1,200, while a combined broad strike and slight off-center error brought $3,600. These aren't the highest value errors from the year, but they're still popular among collectors who appreciate unusual mint mishaps. Die cracks, cuds, and interior die breaks also appear in the 1983 series. These occur when a die begins to break down during use, leaving raised lines or blobs of metal on the finished coin. A dime from 1983 with a large cud covering part of the rim sold for $950, while another with a dramatic break across the reverse sold for $1,450. While these aren't six-figure coins, they're still valued for their uniqueness and rarity. What makes the 1983 Roosevelt dime era coins particularly exciting is that they come from a relatively modern year. These coins circulated widely, which means some errors, possibly valuable ones, may still be sitting unnoticed in jars, drawers, coin rolls, or even pockets today. People rarely inspect their loose change closely, especially small denominations like dimes, which makes the possibility of finding a valuable error even more thrilling. A missing clad layer, a strange metallic tone, a doubled image, or a dramatically shifted strike could be the first clue that a 1983 error dime is worth far more than 10 cents. Collectors who believe they found a rare error should always avoid cleaning the coin. Cleaning can ruin the original surface and drastically reduce the value. Instead, the coin should be stored safely and evaluated by professionals like NGC or PCGS. Certified coins command much higher prices and attract serious buyers who trust verified grades and authenticated error types. The 1983 Roosevelt dime reminds us that even in the world of precision minting, mistakes can and do happen. And when they do, they create treasures. The rarest errors from that year, wrong planchet strikes, extreme off-center strikes, powerful double strikes, and dramatic missing layer coins, have already reached prices between $51,500 and $128,900, with collectors predicting that as more people search through old rolls and collections, new discoveries might surface and break even higher records. So next time a 1983 dime ends up in your hand, don't let it pass without a glance. Look closely. You might be holding something far rarer than you think. Something that transforms an ordinary little coin into a remarkable piece of minting history worth tens of thousands of dollars.